Welcome everyone to my session on observability using Google Cloud Managed Prometheus. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Tushar and I work as a network engineer at Google. So what is Prometheus? Basically, if you ask anyone, how do I monitor Kubernetes? The answer is almost always Prometheus. They go hand in hand, and they were the first and the second products graduated from the CNCF incubator. And according to a recent CNCF survey, 86% of their community uses Prometheus. It is simply the de facto standards across industry when it comes to monitoring. So why do people use Prometheus? First, it works great with Kubernetes, since it can use Kubernetes built-in service discovery to automatically discover new endpoints to script, meaning that you can simply add new script targets without manually maintaining a registry. And nearly every application in Kubernetes land comes with a Prometheus integration, and oftentimes even comes with recommended dashboards and alerts. Now, there is a runway community effect as well when it comes to Prometheus. There is a GitHub repo, Stackflow archives, and Grafana dashboards for pretty much everything related to Prometheus. If you have a question around this, someone would be able to answer it on one of these forums. The reason behind this is because Prometheus and its query language, PromQL, are now the standards. They are what Kubernetes developers know and expect. Third, it's really easy to extend Prometheus. You can write your own exporter with your own metrics for your own application, and it's very straightforward to do this with Prometheus. You can easily monitor standard infrastructure metrics right alongside your custom application metrics as well. Fourth, it is deployable by developers. What it means is, instead of waiting for a central administrator to set up new monitoring, developers can configure monitoring locally as Prometheus runs in the cluster. This shifts left observability and improves the feedback cycle. Lastly, it is universal and open source. Therefore, it is free and has a strong community behind it, just like Kubernetes itself. And people choose Prometheus for the same reason that they choose Kubernetes. So what are the challenges with Prometheus? First, it is hard to scale horizontally. Then it is also hard to have a common global instance. You will have to have different instance for each of your cluster with Prometheus. Third, it is operation heavy and provides no values to the customer. And last, it's very hard to retain historical data. In this diagram, you can see a typical Prometheus setup. So in the middle, we have the Prometheus server that is doing the job of scraping and pulling metrics from the targets. In case your jobs are short-lived, that there is a component called as push gateway to cache these metrics. When new targets are added or configured, a Prometheus operator binary runs alongside this setup to make it discoverable so that the metrics can be scraped by Prometheus. And then there are rules component present as well that can trigger alerts, and they are pushed to the alert manager. In this case, the query language that is used is called PromQL, and most customers also leverage Grafana for dashboarding. The metrics format that is scraped by Prometheus is open metrics, and it's a de facto standard across the industry as well. So this is the same setup, but migrated to Google managed Prometheus. From a user end, the user simply swaps their Prometheus binary with the one Google provides. They simply point their Prometheus data source in Grafana at the comparable compatible query service in GCP. Everything else stays the same. The Prometheus server still stores local data, although the time can be shortened arbitrarily. Recording and alerting rules are still evaluated the same way, except you just need 5 or 10 minutes of local data. And the alert manager component of Prometheus still remain operated by the customer. So what is the difference between Google Cloud Managed Service for Prometheus versus Cloud Monitoring and GKE workload metrics? Google Cloud Managed Service for Prometheus is Google's recommended way to run Prometheus at scale. However, the Cloud Monitoring and GKE workload metric service is the recommended way to monitor Kubernetes application. This is one of the scenarios on how a managed service for Prometheus can be deployed in GCP. The following diagram just illustrates a configuration that uses 2 Google Cloud projects, 3 clusters, and makes managed and self-deployed Prometheus collection. Project 1 has a cluster running managed collections, which runs as a node agent. Collectors are then configured with pod monitoring resources to scrape targets within a namespace and with cluster pod monitoring resources to scrape targets across the entire cluster. Pod monitorings must be applied in every namespace in which you want to collect metrics. However, cluster pod monitorings are only applied once per cluster. Then Project 1 also has a cluster running Grafana and the data source syncer. In this example, these components are hosted in the standalone cluster, but they can be hosted in any single cluster. When a user issues queries from Grafana, Monarch will expand the scoping project A into its constituent monitored project and return results for both Project 1 and Project 2 across all Google Cloud regions. All metrics will be retained in their original project ID and location and will have the required labels for grouping and filtering purposes. Now, Project 2 has a cluster that is running self-deployed collection using the Prometheus operator, but it runs as a standalone service. This cluster is configured to use Prometheus operator, pod monitors, or service monitors to scrape exporters on pods or VMs, which are external targets to the cluster. Project 2 also hosts a push gateway sidecar to gather metrics from ephemeral workloads or short-term jobs. In this case, the recommendation is to actually use managed collection for all Kubernetes environments, as it practically eliminates the overhead of running Prometheus collectors within your cluster. You can run managed and self-deployed collectors within the same cluster as well. However, the recommendation is to have a consistent approach to monitoring, but you might choose to mix deployment methods from some specific use case, such as hosting a push gateway. Now, the other scenario is multiple tenancy, where multiple teams wants to have access to multiple resources. For example, your SRE team would want to query metrics from services in all 3 projects, while dev only wants, let's say, project 1 and 5. In this case, you only need to set up 1 Grafana instance and 1 data source syncer for each metric scope, regardless of how many projects are in the metric scope or how many Google Cloud regions you use. When you issue the queries to Monarch, which is the underlying backend for Prometheus as a service, it would automatically expand these queries to all projects within that metric scope, unless a project ID filter is included. On the ingestion side, you don't need to change anything to achieve this multi-tenant monitoring. This diagram illustrates a deployment that uses multiple clusters in 2 Google Cloud projects and uses both rule and alert evaluation, as well as the optional global rules resource. In this case, all rule queries will be evaluated against a global data store called Monarch, rather than the individual Prometheus agent that is running. And lastly, this illustrates a deployment that uses multiple clusters in 2 Google Cloud projects and also has both rule and alert evaluations. In this case, rules are installed within each managed service Prometheus collection server, just as they are when you're using a standard Prometheus. Rule evaluation executes all the data against the data stored locally on each servers. However, the servers will be configured to retain data long enough to cover the loopback periods for all the rules, which is typically no more than 1 hour. Results from all the rules will be returned to Monarch after evaluation. And that's all from my side. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on the contact information that is mentioned on the slide. Cheers.